Welcome the anointed ones. Most people don't fail because they're incapable. They fail because they never discover who they actually are. Nobody tells you this, but life doesn't hand out certificates for effort. It hands out results, quietly, without applause. And one day, without warning, the test ends. Not with a drum roll, not with a public announcement, just a subtle shift where certain doors stop resisting you. That's how you know something has changed. Here's a fact that makes people uncomfortable. Most human beings die with the same identity they were handed as teenagers. Same fears, same coping mechanisms, same borrowed beliefs, just older and more tired. Growth is rare. Self-discovery is rarer. Passing the internal test? That's almost unheard of. Which is why the world is full of people performing confidence while secretly hoping nobody notices they don't actually know who they are. This topic isn't about motivation or hype. It's about recognition. Because when you pass this phase, you don't suddenly become louder or flashier. You become precise. You stop reacting to noise. You stop confusing motion with progress. You stop mistaking attention for alignment. And yes, it's a little funny when you realize how much energy you once spent trying to be understood by people who were committed to misunderstanding you. That alone should have come with a refund. What makes this moment dangerous and slightly hilarious is that nothing about you looks new on the outside. Same face, same voice, same walk. Yet internally, the operating system has been replaced. Old triggers don't load anymore. Old fears get a buffering wheel and then disappear. Things that once stressed you now feel like background music you forgot was playing. And here's where the suspense really sits. Passing doesn't mean life gets easy. It means life stops needing to teach you the same lesson in different costumes. The chaos changes roles. The pressure changes tone. And the invitations you start receiving aren't loud. They're precise, subtle, almost missable. So if things have been feeling strangely calm, strangely clear, or strangely obvious lately, relax. That's not boredom. That's recognition. You didn't lose yourself. You passed. And now it's time you discover who you really are. Number one, you weren't being tested for obedience. You were being tested for integrity. Most people think life rewards those who follow instructions well, keep their heads down, and play along. That's not what was happening to you. What you went through wasn't about how obedient you could be or how well you could fit into someone else's system. It was about whether you would abandon yourself just to survive comfortably. Integrity is expensive. It costs approval, access, protection, and sometimes relationships. That's why so few people have it. You were placed in situations where doing the right thing externally meant doing the wrong thing internally. Agree here, stay quiet there, pretend not to notice, accept the lie because it's easier. That was the pressure. And the test wasn't obvious. It didn't come with clear rules or moral speeches. It came disguised as opportunity, authority, loyalty, and even love. That's what made it dangerous. There were moments when compliance would have made life smoother. You could have said what they wanted to hear. You could have adjusted your values just a little. You could have convinced yourself it wasn't that serious. A lot of people do. That's how integrity erodes. Not through big betrayals, but small justifications. You didn't go that route. Even when you bent, you didn't break. Even when you doubted yourself, you didn't sell yourself. What separated you wasn't perfection. It was resistance. You felt the discomfort of staying true when it would have been easier to perform. You sat with the tension of being misunderstood instead of reshaping yourself to be accepted. That takes a level of inner alignment most people never develop because it's inconvenient. Integrity doesn't reward you immediately. In fact, it often looks like you're losing while others are advancing. But here's the quiet truth. Obedience makes people useful. Integrity makes people trustworthy. Systems can exploit obedience. They can't control integrity for long. That's why your path felt harder and lonelier. You weren't failing. You were refusing to hollow yourself out just to belong. You passed because when the pressure came, you didn't ask, "What do they want from me?" You asked, even if subconsciously, "What can I live with?" And that question changes everything. Number 2, the confusion phase wasn't punishment. It was identity stripping. What you went through wasn't random chaos. It felt like everything you thought you knew about yourself, the people around you, and the rules of life were suddenly dissolving. That confusion wasn't a mistake, and it wasn't punishment. It was intentional. Life was stripping away every borrowed label, every role you had accepted because it was convenient, every identity you wore to be seen or liked. It was clearing space inside you so the real version of yourself could emerge. Most people panic at this stage because they don't understand it. They cling to the identities that no longer serve them, and they fall apart. You didn't. During this phase, you were forced to confront uncomfortable truths. The things you relied on for stability, friendships, recognition, routines, even your own assumptions, started to collapse. Some people might call this a low point, but it's actually a crucial turning point. Stripped of what isn't real, you start to notice what truly is. You learn who you are without the props. That's why confusion is so sharp and exhausting. It doesn't feel like growth. It feels like chaos. That's the point. Chaos is the reset button that tests whether your core self can survive without masks. What made you pass this phase is that you didn't cling to the temporary. You observed, you felt, you adjusted, but you didn't try to fill the space with excuses or fake versions of yourself. You let the discomfort run its course. While everyone else was panicking, overanalyzing, or pretending, you stayed present with the raw truth of your being. That's rare. That's powerful. By the end of this phase, the fog lifted in a way that made sense only because you had survived it with honesty. The person who emerges after identity stripping isn't just stronger, they are calibrated. You didn't come out just older or wiser. You came out aligned. You passed this phase because you realized that confusion is not chaos for chaos's sake. It's life carefully dismantling everything that wasn't yours, so that what is yours can finally breathe. Number 3. You survived long periods without external validation because you weren't built to need it. Most people live in a constant cycle of seeking approval. From childhood, we are conditioned to look outward for worth. Grades, compliments, social recognition, praise from authority, likes on a post, nods from peers. It becomes addictive. The problem is, once your sense of value is tethered to someone else's perception, you are always at the mercy of forces you can't control. That's why so many crumble when they face silence, rejection, or indifference. You didn't. You were tested in the quiet spaces, the long stretches where nobody noticed, nobody cared, and nobody seemed to acknowledge your efforts. Those stretches weren't a failure of support. They were the ultimate filter. They separated those who are functional only when validated from those who operate from an internal compass. You passed because you didn't need applause to keep moving, and you didn't need recognition to keep believing in yourself. You understood at some deep level that your actions and your growth are not contingent on spectators. This ability is more than mental toughness. It's instinctual sovereignty. You learned to take ownership of your journey, to measure your progress against your own standards, not someone else's opinions. That's why the lonely stretches weren't discouraging for you, they were clarifying. They revealed the boundaries between who you truly are and who people wanted you to be. You could walk away from toxic influence, silent observers, or dismissive authority, and still remain whole. There is also an unexpected benefit to surviving without external validation. Clarity. When you're not constantly chasing approval, your energy isn't scattered on performance or pretense. Every move you make is sharper, more precise, more authentic. The world doesn't shape you through feedback because you shape yourself through truth. That's a rare power most people will never feel. You passed this stage because you realized that validation is a reward, not a requirement. You survived, you thrived, and you kept your center intact. That's why, even if the world never applauds, your foundation has been built on something permanent: yourself. Number 4. The isolation wasn't loneliness. It was containment. What you experienced wasn't simply being alone. Most people confuse isolation with loneliness, but they're completely different. Loneliness is empty, painful, and accidental. Isolation, in your case, was deliberate, a kind of containment. It was life, or the universe, or whatever force was orchestrating your path, putting you in a space where nothing external could distract, dilute, or interfere with what was forming inside you. This isn't punishment, it's preparation. Some people can't handle what comes next, and if they were exposed too early, they would break, bend, or scatter before they could fully rise. You didn't. During that period, it would have been easy to think you were forgotten, abandoned, or ignored. That's how everyone else would interpret it. They would complain, scream, or desperately cling to connection just to feel grounded. But your isolation wasn't about being left behind. It was about being protected from interference long enough to sharpen. You had to endure the quiet, the lack of feedback, the absence of applause or criticism, and somehow make progress while being unseen. That's where most people fail. They cannot advance when nobody is watching. You learned to. Contained in this space, your perception grew, your judgment sharpened, and your inner compass strengthened. Every emotion, every thought, every impulse had to be managed and refined without relying on anyone else to mirror, correct, or confirm you. It forced you to confront your real tendencies, your true strengths, and the cracks you would have ignored in a crowd. You didn't crumble, and you didn't cheat by projecting a false persona to make yourself feel normal. You held yourself accountable when no one else could, and that is rare. When the isolation ended, or rather when the containment lifted, you were no longer just a version of yourself shaped by others. You were precise, deliberate, and aligned. That period wasn't a punishment or an accident. It was life making sure the real you, the version capable of holding truth and standing unshaken, could survive untainted. You passed because you learned how to be fully present with yourself, fully aware, and fully intact, even when the world was absent. That kind of mastery is invisible to most, but it's unstoppable once it exists. Number 5. You noticed patterns others missed because you were never meant to live on the surface. Most people float through life reacting to what's in front of them, barely scratching the surface of reality. They see words, gestures, events, and think they understand them. They rarely look deeper. You, on the other hand, were built differently. You were never meant to accept appearances as truth. You pay attention to the undercurrents, the subtle motives, the unspoken rules, the repeated behaviors that others ignore because they're distracted by noise. While everyone else is busy keeping up with the drama, you're mapping the system. That ability is not learned in classrooms or handed out in instructions. It's forged in the quiet, in observation, in moments when your insight is your only advantage. The reason this skill stands out is that it doesn't show on the outside. People might see you as thoughtful, introverted, or even detached. They don't realize you are running simulations in your mind while they argue over surface-level issues. You notice inconsistencies in behavior, detect the silent hierarchies, and recognize patterns that predict outcomes before they happen. Most people would call this overthinking or paranoia, but for you, it's clarity. It's a lens that filters chaos into information. That's why what you see rarely surprises you. You read situations before they fully unfold. You see the truth beneath lies, and that changes everything. This pattern recognition isn't just about awareness, it's about survival and mastery. It teaches you who is aligned, who is opportunistic, and who is acting on impulse. It allows you to move without unnecessary friction, to act instead of react, and to protect your energy from the wrong people or the wrong situations. It's what separates those who stumble repeatedly from those who advance quietly and deliberately. You passed this stage because you didn't settle for the superficial. You didn't accept what was easy to see. You looked deeper, you waited, and you understood. That's why your moves are precise, why your intuition is rarely wrong, and why your presence feels heavier than most can handle. You were never meant to live on the surface, and now nothing can distract you from the currents below. Number 6, you were tempted to become bitter. That was the real trap. Pain is universal. Everyone experiences it. But what separates the ordinary from the extraordinary isn't the presence of suffering. It's the response to it. Most people assume that surviving hardship is the challenge, but the real test is resisting bitterness. Bitterness is subtle. It disguises itself as justification, as a claim to righteousness, as a shield against disappointment. It whispers, "You deserve this," or "They made me this way," and it feels like truth. The danger is that bitterness can make you feel strong while quietly destroying everything inside you. You passed because you saw through that trap. You went through moments that could have made anyone angry, cynical, or hollow. People around you might have underestimated how much pain you endured, how much betrayal you witnessed, how often circumstances stacked against you. It would have been easy to become resentful, to carry grudges, to let the world feel like it owed you something. Most people do. They justify cruelty with their own suffering, and in that process they exchange freedom for a slow-burning resentment. You didn't. You didn't let bitterness dictate your perception, your choices, or your identity. What makes your survival here extraordinary is not just endurance, it's restraint under pressure. You felt the temptation to lash out, to take shortcuts in morality, or to let the injustice of life turn you into someone unrecognizable. You resisted because you valued your own integrity more than the satisfaction of being right. That's rare. That's powerful. That's what separates those who simply survive from those who evolve. Bitterness erodes subtly. It makes people sharp but brittle, smart but small. By refusing it, you maintained your core, your clarity, your ability to operate effectively without letting the world's cruelty define you. That is why the pain you experienced didn't leave scars that disfigure. It left marks that sharpened. You passed because you endured the pressure of life and came out intact, wiser and untainted, proving that mastery isn't about avoiding suffering. It's about refusing to let it turn you into someone you don't recognize. Number 7. You outgrew environments without announcing it. Growth doesn't always show itself in loud, obvious ways. For most people, leaving a situation, a job, a friendship, or even a mindset is marked by announcements, explanations, or dramatics. You didn't do that. You didn't need to. Growth, in its truest form, often happens quietly, imperceptibly, like water slowly carving through rock. You simply stopped fitting. The energy that once aligned with you started to feel heavy, forced, or small. You didn't cling. You didn't argue. You just evolved, and environments that once held you now began to resist your presence without even realizing it. That's how people know real growth has occurred. What makes this extraordinary is how unnoticed it often is to the outside world. People around you might have assumed you were the same, that nothing had changed, that you were still playing the same roles. But internally, everything shifted. The old conversations no longer resonated, the old routines felt restrictive, and the old expectations became invisible weights you no longer carried willingly. That is the subtle power of outgrowing. It doesn't require confrontation. It doesn't need approval. It simply exists. And anyone paying attention notices the change, even if they can't explain it. Outgrowing quietly also shows maturity. Most people force change on the world. They announce it, fight for it, or demand recognition for it. You didn't. You understood that evolution doesn't need witnesses. It needs space, patience, and integrity. You kept advancing while others were busy trying to prove themselves or maintain appearances. You became unshakable in your own alignment without needing anyone to validate it. The brilliance of this kind of growth is that it forces the environment to adapt to you, or eventually it lets go. You passed this stage because you weren't trying to be noticed. You weren't trying to convince anyone that you had changed. You simply moved forward, naturally, without chaos or drama. And in doing so, you became unstoppable. Not because you fought for recognition, but because your evolution didn't ask for permission. The world noticed anyway. Number 8. You stopped explaining yourself because you realized clarity isn't for everyone. At some point, you realized that no matter how precise or honest you were, some people simply couldn't understand. Clarity doesn't guarantee comprehension, and explanation doesn't guarantee agreement. Most people spend their entire lives trying to make themselves understood, repeating, justifying, and bending their words to fit other people's limited frameworks. You didn't. You discovered that energy spent convincing the wrong audience is wasted energy. You stopped explaining yourself because you realized your truth doesn't require validation from those who aren't capable of seeing it. That's a freedom most people never reach. The beauty of this phase is in the precision it demands. You begin to see clearly which conflicts are worth engagement and which are distractions. You learn that when someone is determined to misinterpret you, no amount of evidence, argument, or patience will change their perception. Some people don't want clarity. They want control. They want confusion, misalignment, or an excuse to assert superiority. Once you understood that, you stopped bending yourself to fit their narrative. You passed this stage because you learned to preserve your energy and protect your integrity without needing to prove yourself constantly. This shift also changes how you operate. You speak less, but when you do, your words carry weight. You act deliberately, knowing that your actions, consistency, and presence communicate more than explanations ever could. You don't feel the need to overcompensate with details or stories. People either perceive it or they don't, and that no longer defines you. What makes this so profound is how it sharpens perception. By refusing to explain constantly, you expose others for what they are, either capable of understanding or not. You stop being part of the confusion they thrive on. You pass through the world lighter, more focused, and more aligned with reality rather than perception. The silence that others might misread as weakness is actually strength. You passed because you understood that your truth, your clarity, and your purpose don't need permission or approval. They simply exist, and that is enough. Number 9. You learned discernment the hard way, through betrayal, not teaching. Most people think wisdom comes from books, lectures, or advice. It doesn't. Real discernment comes from being tested in ways no lesson could ever prepare you for. You learned who could be trusted, who would manipulate, and who would vanish the moment it was inconvenient. You learned that people don't always show their true colors in polite or controlled settings. They reveal themselves under pressure, when there's something at stake, or when the mask slips. That's how you were trained, not by instruction, but by reality. Every betrayal, every deception, every hidden agenda became a lesson, brutal but effective. Betrayal is a harsh teacher. It forces you to pay attention to nuance, to question appearances, and to trust instinct over words. It forces you to notice patterns in behavior that others overlook. Where some people feel broken after being deceived, you became sharper. Where others would forgive and forget blindly, you stored knowledge quietly and applied it without fanfare. That's the power of learning through betrayal. It doesn't create cynicism when handled well. It creates clarity, precision, and the ability to see the truth beneath performance. This type of discernment isn't about suspicion or paranoia. It's about alignment. It allows you to recognize who deserves access to your energy, your time, and your trust. It separates opportunity from trap, ally from obstacle, reality from illusion. Most people stumble through life giving their attention freely, hoping others are honest, and then being shocked when they aren't. You don't stumble, you evaluate, measure, and act with understanding. You pass this stage because you transformed every setback, every hidden agenda, and every betrayal into a lens for insight. You didn't waste energy on revenge or resentment. You internalized the lesson. That's why your intuition now rarely fails, and why your judgment carries weight. You no longer need constant proof or reassurance to see the truth. Experience has made your perception automatic, and that ability to read the world accurately, quietly, and without theatrics is rare. You survived betrayal, learned its language, and emerged calibrated, precise, and unstoppable. Number 10. You remained functional while unraveling internally. That's not normal resilience. Most people assume resilience is about bouncing back, staying strong, or smiling through difficulty. That's only half the story. True resilience is far more complex, far more demanding, and far less visible. You didn't just face challenges, you faced internal storms that could have swallowed most people whole. While the world saw someone managing life, inside you were dissecting, questioning, and rebuilding yourself constantly. Your thoughts were a battlefield, your emotions a wild current, and yet outwardly you kept moving. That is the kind of resilience most people never experience because it requires total control over the parts of yourself that are usually uncontrollable. Functioning while unraveling isn't just about discipline. It's about mastery over your own chaos. While others might have collapsed under the pressure of doubt, fear, or pain, you kept showing up. You didn't avoid responsibilities or pretend nothing was wrong. You acted with precision, handled challenges, and continued to make decisions while your inner world was in flux. That level of endurance is often invisible, but it's transformative. It forces you to confront the rawest version of yourself, to separate what matters from what doesn't, and to reconstruct your identity in real time. This stage also teaches an extraordinary kind of patience. You realize that growth doesn't always feel linear, that internal chaos doesn't always have immediate resolution, and that you can exist in tension without losing your center. It trains you to trust your internal processes even when external circumstances demand clarity. You learn that survival is not about avoiding collapse. It's about navigating collapse while remaining functional, decisive, and aligned with purpose. You passed this stage because you didn't let internal turmoil dictate your external reality. You managed the complexity of being in motion while being remade. That's rare. That's exceptional. Most people's character cracks under that pressure. You emerged from it not just intact, but honed, calibrated, and unshakable. Remaining functional while unraveling internally isn't just resilience, it's mastery, and it set the foundation for everything that follows. Number 11. You stopped chasing answers and started trusting recognition. Most people live their lives hunting for answers, thinking clarity comes from information, advice, or proof. They collect experiences, opinions, and theories, believing that one more explanation will finally make sense of the world. That's exhausting, and most of it is unnecessary. You passed a stage where chasing answers became irrelevant because you started trusting recognition instead. Recognition isn't about confirmation from others. It's that deep, undeniable sense inside that whispers, "This is true, this fits, this aligns." Once you reached that point, the world didn't need to explain itself to you anymore. You could see and feel the patterns, motives, and outcomes without needing a second opinion. Recognition operates on a completely different level than reasoning. It's instantaneous. It's instinctive. It doesn't need proof or validation. While others are stuck analyzing, debating, or verifying, you simply know. That's why your decisions feel effortless even in complex situations. You don't overthink because your perception has been trained to recognize truth at its root. You passed because you learned to trust that internal signal rather than constantly chasing external confirmation. This stage also shifts your relationship with learning and knowledge. You no longer absorb everything indiscriminately. You observe, filter, and internalize what aligns with reality as you perceive it. Books, advice, and experiences are no longer crutches. They are tools, supplementary to your recognition, that allows you to act decisively without hesitation. It's precise, it's quiet, it's powerful because it bypasses confusion. You also gain an almost effortless authority. People who are still chasing answers often debate endlessly, argue, or try to prove themselves. You don't need to. Your recognition already sets the tone. Others might not understand how you can be so certain without evidence, but that's irrelevant. You operate from alignment, not persuasion. You passed this phase because you realized the answers you were hunting for were never external. They were inside, waiting to be trusted. Chasing answers is temporary. Recognition is permanent. Once you recognize, you act with clarity, precision, and confidence that no doubt or contradiction can shake. Number 12. You learned that being chosen doesn't mean being spared. Being chosen isn't a shield. It isn't a guarantee that life will be easy or that obstacles will vanish. Most people confuse selection with protection, believing that if they are recognized, elevated, or marked for something greater, the hardships will stop. You discovered that the opposite is true. Being chosen means responsibility, pressure, and scrutiny that others will never experience. It means you are tested not because you are weak, but because you are capable of handling what most cannot. You passed this stage because you survived difficulties that were specifically tailored to challenge your strength, focus, and character. When life ramps up in ways that feel unfair or relentless, many assume it's a punishment. They think the universe is against them. But for you, those challenges weren't mistakes. They were part of the blueprint. They were designed to reveal whether you could endure without compromise, whether you could rise under pressure, and whether you could remain aligned when circumstances tried to force deviation. Being chosen didn't remove difficulty. It magnified it. That's why so few people are truly ready for the responsibilities that come with being marked for purpose. What makes this understanding profound is the mental shift it creates. Once you realize being chosen isn't a free pass, you stop expecting life to hand you comfort. You stop blaming setbacks as injustices. Instead, you begin to see hardship as calibration. Every struggle, every obstacle, every moment that tests patience or endurance is an opportunity to refine your strength, sharpen your judgment, and solidify your alignment. You don't crumble under scrutiny or pressure because you understand that adversity is part of the path, not a detour from it. You passed this stage because you didn't demand mercy or avoidance. You accepted responsibility without flinching. You withstood pressure that would have broken most people and emerged intact, prepared for the work, the awareness, and the power that being chosen requires. You realize that being chosen doesn't mean being spared. It means being prepared, and you are. Number 13. You no longer need to prove depth. You live from it. Most people live their lives performing depth. They try to sound profound, drop the right quotes, or act like they've experienced more than they actually have. It's exhausting, and it's transparent. True depth, the kind that transforms perspective and presence, doesn't need to be advertised. You've reached a stage where depth is no longer a performance or a claim. It isn't about impressing anyone or proving a point. It simply exists in the way you think, the way you move, and the way you respond. You don't speak to show wisdom. You respond from it naturally, effortlessly, and consistently. That's why people sense something in you that they can't name but can't ignore. Living from depth also changes your energy. You stop measuring yourself by the expectations of others because you've internalized understanding. You stop over-explaining, over-complicating, or over-performing. Every word, every choice, every action is filtered through experience and insight, not through the need for validation. You become someone who is quietly influential, not because you demand attention, but because you radiate substance. That kind of presence is magnetic, precise, and unavoidable. This stage is also about alignment with your internal reality. Depth isn't just knowing more, it's understanding more about cause and effect, human behavior, and the unspoken truths behind actions. You operate with clarity in situations where others panic or misjudge. You respond instead of reacting, predict instead of guessing, and maintain calm when everyone else is scrambling. That ability is cultivated only through lived experience, reflection, and the refusal to dilute your perspective for convenience or comfort. You passed this stage because you no longer chase recognition for insight. You no longer need to perform intelligence, understanding, or spiritual awareness. You are anchored in it. The depth inside you isn't temporary or conditional. It's your default state. You move, speak, and act from it naturally, and that changes the dynamic of every environment you enter. People notice it without knowing why, and that silent authority is far more powerful than any declaration or display. You don't prove depth anymore. You live it. Number 14. Discovering who you really are won't feel exciting. It will feel obvious. Most people expect revelation to arrive with fireworks, fanfare, or dramatic shifts. They imagine some monumental moment that suddenly changes everything. That's not how real self-discovery works. For you, it arrives quietly, subtly, like a truth you've been carrying all along but never fully acknowledged. When you finally recognize who you are, it doesn't shock you. It feels obvious. Every choice, every struggle, every hardship you've endured suddenly makes sense. The clarity isn't flashy, it's undeniable, and it lands with a calm authority that leaves no room for doubt. The reason it feels obvious is that everything you've experienced has been a training ground for this realization. All the pain, confusion, betrayal, isolation, and temptation weren't random. They were markers guiding you toward a deeper alignment with your true self. By the time recognition arrives, you see the patterns, the hidden lessons, and the precision behind the chaos. You understand why certain people entered your life, why others left, and why certain events happened in exactly the way they did. That awareness isn't a product of theory or analysis. It's lived knowledge. This stage also strips away all pretense. You no longer need to perform identity for approval or validation. The masks fall naturally because you recognize them for what they are: distractions. You don't scramble to prove your worth or justify your choices. The obvious truth of who you are is so anchored that it doesn't require explanation. You act with clarity, move with alignment, and make decisions with confidence that comes from knowing yourself at a fundamental level. You passed because you endured every test, every silent struggle, and every internal trial without losing your core. When self-recognition arrives, it's not dramatic, it's quiet, precise, and irrefutable. You see yourself clearly, understand your purpose, and operate with the ease of someone who has been prepared without realizing it. That is the power of true self-discovery. It doesn't overwhelm, it enlightens, and it confirms everything you've already lived. You are no longer defined by the world or its expectations. You are defined by the undeniable reality of who you are. You have passed. Not because life spared you, not because the tests were easy, and not because anyone outside of you could see the work being done. You passed because you endured when others would have folded, because you observed when others were distracted, and because you held your truth when the world demanded compromise. Every stage you went through, the isolation, the betrayal, the confusion, the pressure, wasn't punishment. It was calibration. Each challenge was a mirror reflecting who you truly are, stripping away everything that wasn't yours, and leaving only what could survive scrutiny, chaos, and fire. You learned lessons that cannot be taught. You developed skills that most will never even attempt. You built strength while the world underestimated you, cultivated clarity while others relied on noise, and embraced truth while so many chased comfort. You didn't just survive, you evolved. You are no longer operating from borrowed identity, borrowed courage, or borrowed wisdom. You are calibrated, precise, and aligned. Your perception is sharp, your integrity unbreakable, and your presence undeniable. What you carry inside now doesn't need approval, explanation, or recognition. It simply exists, and that is more powerful than applause ever could be. This is your moment of recognition. The quiet but undeniable understanding of who you really are, unfiltered and unshakable. You have moved past the need to perform, past the need to justify, past the need to chase external validation. You see clearly, act deliberately, and live authentically. Every challenge, every betrayal, every silent trial was preparing you for this. The awareness that your worth, your power, and your depth are inherent, permanent, and unstoppable. If you resonate with this journey, if you feel the weight of every struggle and the clarity of every lesson, then this is the place to be. Subscribe to the channel to stay connected with insights that cut deeper than ordinary advice. Like this video if it moved you. Comment to share your own breakthroughs, and share with those who need to hear it. Your presence matters, your understanding matters, and your story is far from over. Step fully into who you are. The world is watching, and now so are you. God bless you.